debut full-length album. Give it up for Greta Van Fleet.
Go way back.
Yeah, minutes. So right off the bat, we should say that Josh is hanging out upstairs because he's kind of warming up his voice and giving himself a chance to prepare for the performance later. That will not hinder this discussion at all. First of all, thank you guys for taking the time to join us.
Thank you.
Make it better? Okay, all right, cool. Well, we'll talk about why we think it makes it better in a minute. But I mentioned in the intro Bob Seger, and I know that you guys had the chance to open for him in, I believe, in Saginaw, Michigan, last fall. So tell me a little bit about meeting Bob Seger. What did that mean to you guys?
As far as meaning goes,
I'm not entirely sure that it ever actually happened to this day. It was that surreal, you know?
It did.
So it's one of those things where we think it happened, but
right. It all felt like a dream.
Yeah, I think, you know, it was like a moment when it kind of set in. This is Bob Seger, you know, when he was sound checking, and he sat down at the piano and lit up a cigarette, and he started playing Let It Be, and we're all like,
yeah.
You know, he's everything that you'd wish. He's everything that he seems. He goes up to you and he says, "What's your name?" And he, you know, Sam.
My name's
He's like,
Bob.
"Nice to meet you, Sam." He looks right in my eyes. I'm Bob. He's an amazing character.
Super cool. So what did you take away from watching him do his set? What did you guys? I mean, here you are, you know, you've been out touring a little bit, gotten the sense as a guy who's been doing it for decades at this point.
Music really is a superpower, because he's doing it at, what, 73s, 2-3s?
Yeah.
Now? Yeah.
Yeah.
That was pretty incredible to watch. I think about my grandfather doing that. It's not the same. It's a superpower.
Ouch!
He's watching this. Right?
Oh, he's watching.
Well, I mean, there certainly is something to the essence of rock and roll being a very youthful sort of enterprise.
Which makes it lifeless, doesn't it?
It does. Look, I've seen plenty of artists who are Bob Seger's age and older, who backstage look every bit of their age. You know, they're kind of sitting in their, you know, whatever, their name gets announced, they walk on stage, and 20 years just goes away.
Yeah, it's like they're like the prototypes for, you know, how long you can play rock and roll.
Yeah.
Because it's never been done like that before, and those guys are still going.
Yeah.
And the Stones and all of those guys.
So I want to talk a little bit about growing up in and I think I got this Frankenmuth. Is that the correct pronunciation? Yeah. I believe, and it may have been Josh who referred to growing up as growing up in a vinyl playground. So tell me a little bit about, you know, the music that you heard around the house growing up.
That's interesting. I mean, there was quite a bit of it was an assortment of things.
Everything. It never stopped, so there's quite a lot of material.
Yeah, it was a lot of traditional music that was going on, and I still am not sure whether that was placed there on purpose or not.
All right, traditional in what sense?
In the roots of
roots of everything.
Very primitive.
You go back,
very primitive blues.
Yeah, you go back to like Joe Baez, or in the folk sense, or like Muddy Waters, in the blues sense.
Yeah.
The very beginning vein of where things started. We explored from there.
Don't forget the soul.
And the soul, lots of soul.
Yeah.
Soul Man.
Yeah. You credit your parents, obviously, and Danny, I'm sort of including you. You're not, you know.
I grew up 4 miles down the road.
Right. So you're part of the family.
Same thing.
You're
Same music too.
But you credit your parents with, you know, kind of exposing you, you know, both musically and in terms of literature. So how does that, or how does that come out in the music or the songs that you're writing, the things that your parents exposed you to?
I mean, in terms of sonic, qualities. I'm not, there are certain elements of that come in maybe more visually, but lyrically, I think that plays a big role.
Yeah.
In things that we were reading then and things we're reading now. And, Josh's influence, and that really helps inspire a lot of the lyrics.
Right. I love this. I think I read this in your bio. You got to help me here. That you've been influenced by, get this list now, Tchaikovsky, Robert Frost, the Lord of the Rings trilogy, Tolkien, hold on, and Apocalypse Now. So help me. Yeah. So help me knit those together. How does that help?
The flagship pieces. They're the best pieces of art ever created.
Pinnacle points, really.
And
Sheet crawl out of the muck.
And how does that come out in the music? How do those influences come out in the music?
I think there's certain cinematic aspects affiliated with all of those things. And I think we really try to include that, the sense of urgency in our music.
Yeah. I read about the artists that you have admired, and some of this may have come from your parents' collection: Wilson Pickett, Joe Cocker,
Oh, yes.
Elmore James, Sam and Dave. Love that. Even up to and including artists like John Denver.
Oh, yeah.
Again, that's a very interesting mix.
John Denver is actually a really, really, really important part of our upbringing. And I was actually just asked this question today because it seems like a bit of a curveball, John Denver. And the reason that it's such a big deal to us is that's what we sung around the fire. Why did we sing that around the fire? Is because it's freedom. You listen to John Denver and everything about it, that big voice, that jackhammer vibrato, the nature, everything affiliated with it, with love, all of it.
Yeah, that in many ways, by definition, is very rock and roll. John Denver was very rock and roll.
Woo!
Yeah, that's it. Tolkien!
So tell me, as you were, maybe middle school age or even high school age, which is not that long ago for you guys. That is meant in the most positive way.
Very funny, very funny.
Contemporary music. Were there any contemporary artists or bands that you were listening to that interested you? I mean, we've been talking about, artists from decades ago.
There are lots, and you have to look for them for sure. And we had to find the ones that we really, really could find a connection with.
Yeah.
Some of them found us too. One of them, I remember Sam and I went to a concert, and it was the opening band that caught our attention rather than the headlining band. And
Who was that?
Well, the opening band was Louis Del Mar.
Who was the headliner?
Oh, the headliner was Young the Giant, and they still kicked ass. But Louis Del Mar, I think, stole the show.
What inspired you about?
I think it was for both of us the performance and the fact that they really focused on the artistic aspect of their work.
The energy, the songwriting, and the production is the second to none, really.
Yeah.
But I think that the reason that we look back and say, man, music was so great back then is because all of the music we know now from back then has stood the test of time. So now we know about it. But now it's our job in the contemporary sense to dig through all the nonsense, find the authentic stuff. Because I think that's how art has always been. There's always been, 90%
Fluff.
Fluff. And you have to actively find what is great.
Yeah.
It's interesting because as much of what we grew up with being music and a lot of art forms that were, done many years ago, decades ago, that were influential to us then, it seems as if we're still products of, our generation, the products of our environment now, and so much of this time, and there are many contemporary artists who influence us that we listen to quite a bit, and that even Fleet Fox is a big one. First Aid, Black Keys.
Black Keys, there we go. Yeah. So when did you guys start playing together? Was that just always happening?
I think it was interesting because everybody was sort of developing on their own, growing up quite a bit, and musically, and we all kind of played separate. And it wasn't until Sam was about 12 years old and Josh and I were maybe 16 that we had actually started getting together with a drummer from high school. And it wasn't later, long later that Danny arrived, probably around 17.
Yeah.
And that was the moment that we all played together. Yeah.
By the time we found each other, we were really well on our way to becoming musicians, except for the fact that we didn't have the playing with each other experience.
Right.
So we got to learn together, which was cool.
And Daniel, we were a jazz band together. We both played guitar in jazz band. And
Some
he was,
days.
and some days, it was really early. This is like 7
If we showed up.
a.m. It was ridiculous.
Wait.
But anyway, yeah, we were playing guitar, but then we got talking, and I've known him since first grade, but then it got to the point where he's like, hey, you mind if I come over to kind of like play jam with you guys? I'm like, yeah, sure, why not? And then he just went out of his way to do all these drum beats and different things that he knew that our drummer couldn't do. And we're like, I got trying to show him up, man, this is the plan.
Kind of auditioning for his spot in the band.
I call it showing off.
What can you say?
Started playing with his feet, too. Check this
It
out.
worked though, it worked.
So early on, what was the repertoire? What were you guys playing? Early.
A lot of old blues covers. A
Yeah.
lot. Like, even
For
like,
4 hours at a bar.
Yeah.
yes. We played a lot of Cream too, actually. Yeah. Cool. Because that was like our first inspiration of, like, this is the powerhouse 3-piece.
Right. Right. Were you guys, speaking of that, were you guys playing bars when you were
Yes.
significantly underage at that point?
Oh, significantly. Yeah. Totally.
Every one of us.
Significantly illegal.
I actually don't think that I've ever heard of anything more illegal than what that was. Because, I mean, me and Daniel were like 13 or 14 years old going into these bars.
Till 2 or 3 in the morning.
And yeah, it'd be
Literally,
like,
it'd be like gunfire in the parking lot. People would be doing drugs on the back of the
the
toilet.
bikers would show up.
I just have to pee. I just have to pee.
The bikers loved us.
Every time you went to the bathroom, you would be like, please don't be a drug deal, please don't be a drug deal.
I just want to sit here and read Tolkien.
Every once in a while, there's a boss on his way out and he's asking for directions and they don't want to talk to him. And
What do they say about being raised by rock and roll?
Yeah, but you know if it's a drug deal if you open the door and they just go.
You want us to extrapolate? We can.
I'm not quite sure how I let this conversation get off the rails.
This is educational, Scott.
Yeah,
This is
well,
educational.
we'll reel it back in here. When did you guys decide that writing your own songs was kind of key to furthering the band?
I think that we, as early on as we were doing covers and all of that, we had in mind that at some point we wanted to start writing our own material, because then, that's when sort of self-identity comes into play, and as musicians, that we have work that we can say, here we are, and do something that would be, ours. And I think that was always on the radar for every individual in the band at as early on as it was, that we always wanted to write our own music.
All of our favorite groups wrote their own material, so we
Yeah.
thought, well,
Sure.
we might as well give
Followed
it a
by
shot. And
greatness.
then we wrote Highway Tune.
Well, I mean, if I understand correctly, Highway Tune was the first song you wrote?
Yes, because Jake came to us, he's like, hey guys, I got this riff. And we're like, oh, cool.
It didn't sound like that at the time.
No, it was really funky.
no, it did not.
Little Squire.
It sounded exactly like it did to this day.
It hasn't changed a bit.
Well, speaking of that, so writing that, I mean, amazing that Highway Tune was the first song you wrote, and which went on to, a fair amount of success. But process. So, is songwriting for you guys something where you're all kind of working on things and you kind of bring it in the studio, demo it, and figure it out, or do you work on this collectively? In other words, go into the studio, got this idea, and really work it out amongst the four of you?
I think it happens really quite organically, in the sense that if someone has an idea, it's them working on it, and usually when someone, if it's Danny or myself or Sam or Josh bringing in the song, it's pretty close to fully arranged, but the intent is there, and it's pretty fully formed, and you want to be able to present it to everybody and say,
Right.
I've got this idea, and we can do all of these things, and it's pretty self-explanatory.
Well, it could happen that way, or it could happen like somebody's playing something on guitar, just messing around, and we all go, what's that?
Yeah.
And then it explodes from there.
Into it, yeah.
So there's no consistency,
Yeah.
really. I mean, pretty much every song we've written has been written differently.
if I understand it, now I'm going to talk about him because he's not here, that your brother occasionally
do that all the time.
needs to get kicked in the butt to write the lyrics?
Yeah, no.
Yeah, we're strong on it.
It's usually about the time that we have the track completely recorded and,
I'm
ready
not
to
really
go.
privy to that information.
And then we're like, hey Josh, are we gonna record vocals? He's like, give me 10 minutes. He just goes into the closet and writes
He
lyrics.
does, that's pretty much it.
Yeah. Well, there's nothing like, and I'm sure you guys know this, there's nothing like deadline pressure.
He
You
works
got a
great.
deadline,
That's true.
sorry, you got to deliver.
Yeah, he's great at that. I'm
Yeah.
not. In school, I would be like, and I just wouldn't do it.
Now, so speaking of this, and again, because your brother's not here, so you guys, obviously, and Danny, I'm going to include you in this because you've been around long enough.
Yeah.
You're a band of siblings, right? And there is some history in rock and roll of bands with siblings, and not too distant history either. Think about Oasis or the Black Crowes. I'm sure there are many others that people could name. Not
White Stripes.
not necessarily the history of longevity that maybe you guys aspire to, but I'm wondering if the sibling rivalry, if there are arguments that happen amongst you guys.
It's very productive, actually.
Talk about how so.
Used to be. Go back.
Arguing can be very productive.
And no, it totally is,
It
because,
can be.
and I think it's always the act of trying to one-up each other
Yeah.
that makes the music great.
Uh-huh.
Because it's not like, oh, that's good enough. It's like, oh, they're gonna do something better there, so I better slip
Step it
in
up.
with this.
Yeah.
And then you sit there for an hour trying to find out something, and
It used to be a lot worse than it is now. I think, like 3 years ago,
Oh, yeah.
especially between Josh and myself, I think it was a far more aggressive game.
And it
Just
just-
to
there
get
was
something
nothing productive
creatively.
about it.
And
Nothing
that is like,
productive.
we've broken the garage door and I've thrown him through the other door on the other side. Once that was broken, there was another door besides the
There
other.
was a window that we broke just because the other ones were
So
broken.
I'm wondering. Okay, so clearly you guys are sort of, you and Josh are kind of the
That's
alpha
what I
and
had to
omega
do.
or whatever. Who's the peacemaker?
It's a good.
Who do you think that would be? I wonder.
I don't know.
Well, there's only one left.
I don't know. I'm sometimes the peacemaker, but then sometimes I'm a dick too. So then Daniel is usually the one that's the
We
peacemaker.
take turns, like doing the dishes.
Josh
Yeah.
is the scarlet glove to my iron fist.
I wouldn't say that.
When you guys first, kind of really made it a band, you started writing songs, was there always an intention to do this professionally? Were you intent upon,
No, absolutely not. We
No.
had no idea.
Well, we'll talk about that.
We just played music always, and we still do, just because we enjoy it. We have a
Uh-huh.
fun time writing music, producing music, playing music live.
Yeah.
And I don't think there was ever one sliver of even trying to explore doing it professionally, because we thought, oh, that's not an option because it's 1 in a million chance.
Yeah.
But it just happened.
Mm.
And it's the most fantastic job that I could ever imagine for
Yeah.
myself, for anyone. It's really-
What was the point when you realized, oh, wait a minute, we could actually do this for a living? Was
Are
there?
we doing it for a living?
Very recently.
I think that when the team started to be, assemble, that it became more apparent that we're moving into the realms of something professional.
Sure.
And that was, in a great part still now because, being young and getting into it, maintaining control creatively and artistically and control in general, I think that was sort of around the time where it became, okay, it's become a profession.
Right. So, Black Smoke Rising comes out, a lot of attention, highway tune, and to get the 800-pound gorilla out of the room now, the inevitable comparisons to Led Zeppelin, and I want you guys to give me a sense of how much time did you spend listening to Led Zeppelin? Was it something that you guys were fascinated by?
Yeah, as much as any of the British invasion, I think.
Yeah.
Is what we spent. I mean, it was an equivalent proportion of time that we spent listening to Zeppelin as we did to a lot of the others, and that was kind of later because we grew up with so much roots again.
Sure.
Music, that it wasn't. People would think or assume that we listened to a lot of rock and roll music in that contemporary
Right.
sense, but we actually discover bands like The Who and Led Zeppelin, the Beatles, the Kinks, the Stones, and all of those guys probably around high school.
Yeah.
So I think it was equal parts a lot of what
Yeah.
Zeppelin is, and we're really humbled by the.
And like you said, we learned our instruments individually before, it was a lot of self-taught was involved, and at the time there was a lot of Zeppelin and The Who, and it's like it's literally inspiring, and it gets you to want to be better, almost want to be better than what you're hearing. And then when we all come together, we view it differently. We kind of just come at each other, and that's where it gets to the point where it sounds like Greta Van Fleet.
And it's interesting that I think Jimmy Page or Robert Plant would tell you that they listened to the same things that you guys were listening to.
Similar
growing up.
influences.
These old blues artists and R&B and soul from the U.S. in the 50s and early 60s. It's fascinating that here generations later, that stew, that musical stew, still comes out in the way that you guys have determined, through your DNA. As you're now preparing to release your full-length debut album, are you still, is that still evolving for you?
Every single day.
How so?
Well, I think that, I think all art actually, I think you'd agree, is ever-changing, and art should always be new. I mean, look at the most relevant artists of all time, Paul McCartney. Not only has he always kept his music career new, fresh, he does what he wants, and that's healthy for the artist. And if the artist isn't happy, nobody's happy. And not only that, but he paints and does all these other things, and you need to expand. And I think that's what we have been doing. And I think once the album comes out, it'll be
Some new ideas.
It'll be new
Hopefully.
ideas. I think it's a lot more Greta Van Fleet.
Huh. Okay. Well, and we'll get to that in a minute. One of the things that again, because your brother's not here, I'll ask a question about.
It's fun, isn't it?
Did you always know he could sing like that?
No.
No, I did.
You did.
He told
That's why
me
he's one
privately one
He
day.
doesn't wake up.
I mean, at one point when you're writing songs or you're rehearsing or whatever, and he busts out that voice.
I think it was at a point where we started accumulating more gear, and then we got Danny, who was loud as hell, so that was a factor.
Got to sing over that.
And so he, at one point, just decided to sing over that, because we had a little PA, and then we all
He
stopped
shut all of
playing.
us up.
Yeah, we stopped playing, because he just cut through everything, and we're like, sing like that. And he was like, we didn't, who knew he had that
That was
voice?
good.
We actually
he
had
probably
to
didn't
kick around
know
there.
either.
No, we had no idea what he sounded like until
Yeah.
we could scrap up the money to get a nice PA.
Yeah. Love that. I think Sam, it may have been you who referred to, or no, Danny.
What did I say?
Oh, no.
Who referred to Highway Tune, and I believe unironically, as your youthful stage. Am I correct in that? So, and as odd as it may seem to be asking a band who's just starting their career, how do you think you've evolved from the time you wrote and recorded Highway Tune to now?
I think that we've come a ways from which Highway Tune, I believe, was recorded about 4 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And within that time, I mean, extensive travel and touring and different shows, and that's a consistency of night after night that, you're growing in ways that you don't understand or know consciously, in a lot of sense. And being in the studio and becoming more versatile and understanding and professional studio musicians.
The craft.
To understand the craft and music writing, songwriting, and it's knowledge, and I think it's a practice which breeds evolution, and I think a lot of that has happened over the last 4 years. So.
We've had time to mature as musicians.
Mature, yeah. So agree with that, man.
As musicians. Listen.
Yeah. I was gonna say, don't let that get around.
I'm still as immature as it
So you
gets.
mentioned you mentioned taking these songs out and having the opportunity to to play them before audiences on tour. And in the process of writing songs, particularly maybe writing the new record, is it always in your mind about how the songs will play live?
Yes.
How,
I think that
In the sense that a lot of them are written in a live setting.
Yeah,
Exactly.
the interesting thing is that we've never really had like the ability to record things in the first 4 years of doing this. So when we wrote a song, we didn't record it, we just knew the song. And so it was always playable live.
Right.
Because I think a lot of bands write in the studio, so then they're putting things on it that you really can't.
Can't replicate.
It becomes hard to do live, and then you have to be like, uh-oh, we're gonna have to hire someone new. Or just slaughter it, or I don't know,
Right.
rework it, I
Yeah.
don't know.
Yeah. Do you guys, when you record, is it all four of you playing live on the floor?
Yeah.
As often as we
Playing
can.
together?
Well, that's the thing, is because if you separate the studio musician and then the live performing musician, they're kind of two different worlds, and so we grew up playing live. That's all we could do. We didn't have resources to record and do any of that stuff. So we've always, I think, been more, prevalent as live performing musicians. So a lot of it happens live. So, and that's all the energy and that's all the feel. So that's a lot of that when we do record it live or re-record it. We all kind of want to be playing at the same time, and we're tracking a lot of it as much as we can live, and that emotion kind of translates.
Yeah, and as you're, now, we were talking upstairs, you started out playing, little clubs, for 100 people, 200 people, whatever. Now you're out at, 2,000 seat venues, maybe playing some festivals for larger audiences. Is it somewhat daunting, when you get out and all of a sudden you got to fill up a larger room? Does that change your approach to what
Turn the
you're
amps
doing?
up.
Well, you can do that.
Yeah, very simple. I don't know. I think that we've been largely desensitized to large crowds, mostly because we took the hit. It's like an investment. You take the hit and you're like, oh God, like what's happening? And because we opened for I don't know, what's a big crowd? The Foo Fighters. It's like 150,000 people you're looking at.
What's a big crowd?
It's no, that's a massive crowd. And then,
Pretty magnificent.
and I feel like once you do that, you're like, okay, I can deal with this.
Yeah, you guys. Speaking of recording, you've given a fair amount of credit to your producer Al Sutton.
He's a genius.
Well, let's go with that.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Okay, it was a genius.
Well, let's go with that a little bit. What does he bring to the process? How does he help you achieve your musical vision?
Well, the thing is, when we had this little crappy demo of Highway Tune put together, he was the one who said, okay, there's something here. And he brought us into his studio, and we didn't know it. But for about 2 years, he was kind of seasoning us in the studio realm as to be studio musicians. And I think he really helped us go from, 15-year-old kids who don't really know what it's like to record a song to, 17-year-old kids who do. A little bit.